Welcome to the fun part. Now it's time to apply what we have learned and create a composite using perspective. Before I jump on Photoshop, we're going to do a quick recap of what we need to do to find the horizon line of a photo. I have added these to the lesson notes so that you can quickly refer to them as needed. Step 1. Find the horizon line of an object. Step 2. If the horizon line is not so perceivable, like when you don't have the sky meeting with land or water, try to look for lines that can help you find any vanishing points. We know that vanishing points always sit on the horizon line, and therefore, finding the vanishing point will help us determine where the horizon line is. Step 3. If you still cannot find the horizon line, maybe because you are using an isolated object with a solid background or there are no lines, sky, and land in your image, remember this principle: we cannot see the top part of something if it is above the horizon line, and we cannot see the bottom part of something if it is below the horizon line. Together with the camera angle method, this principle can help us find the position of the horizon line. Remember the camera angle method. If the camera is pointing straight, the horizon line is in the middle of the photo. If the camera is pointing up, the horizon line is in the bottom part of the photo. And if the camera is pointing down, the horizon line is in the top part of the photo. Also, remember that the less we see of the bottom or the top, the closer the horizon line is. If we follow these steps, we should be able to find the horizon line in no time. Depending on the type of photo, sometimes we can find the horizon line just by doing the first step, and other times we need to keep going to step 3. Okay, so without further ado, let's proceed to our photo manipulation. We will create a composite using several source photos, but we'll begin with these two. A beautiful historic hall, and an elegant woman on a throne. I got these images from Unsplash and Shutterstock. The hall image is going to be our background, and the woman will be the main subject. The first thing we need to do is find the horizon lines of both photos, then match them and merge them into one. Looking at the background, we can see several receding lines which can help us locate the horizon line. All lines are pointing to one point, therefore it is safe to say that this is a one-point perspective photo, where we have only one vanishing point. With photos like this one, it's easy to find the horizon line. But what about the photo of the woman? Okay, so this photo is a bit more challenging. The image has no evident receding lines we can use to find the vanishing point and horizon line. Also, the subject does not have a perceivable depth, like when we have a cube. So we cannot draw receding lines from it either. In this case, we need to apply the camera angle method and the above or below horizon principle we've mentioned earlier. When looking at this photo, we can tell that the camera is pointing straight. Therefore the horizon line is somewhere in the middle. But let's look more in detail and find the exact position. Starting from the bottom, we can see the top part of the woman's feet. And moving up a bit, we can also see the top part of her thighs, and this means that the horizon line is further above. If we jump to the head, we can see that the uppermost part is not visible. If we move down a bit more, we can see that the uppermost part of the shoulders is also not visible. This means that the horizon line is further down. So now we know that the horizon line area is somewhere between her shoulders and her thighs. Keep in mind that you don't need to be 100% accurate when matching the perspective of organic objects, like people, animals, trees, and so on. Most of the time, the depth of these objects is not so perceivable, therefore an approximation of the horizon line position is usually enough. On the other hand, if you have objects with lines, like for example, a wooden box where the lines are very straight and evident, we need to be 100% accurate, otherwise, it will look off. But since we are using this photo of a woman, which is an organic thing, an approximation of the horizon line position will do the job. However, we still want to be as accurate as possible, and I think we can fine-tune this further. Something that can also help us refine the area of the horizon line is the throne. If we look closely, we can see a bit of the top part of the armrests. Therefore, I would say that the horizon line is sitting somewhere here, under the breasts. The next step is to separate the woman and throne from this black background, as we want to replace it with a historical hall image. There are various Photoshop tools one can use to achieve this. I personally like to use the pen tool. I won't be covering how to use Photoshop tools as there are plenty of tutorials out there. Now that we have the woman separated from the background, we can match the horizon lines and merge them into one. As you can see, the woman is now in perspective, but I will reduce the size a bit to create a better composition and have a good size ratio between the woman and the background. Size is also part of perspective. I haven't mentioned size earlier because we don't need to worry about size during the image sourcing process. We can tackle size and proportions at the compositing stage, which is what we're doing now. To make sure that the size of an object is correct, we need to compare it to other elements in the artwork. So, in this case, I'll be comparing the woman's size to that of the hall. I use the surroundings to set the correct proportions quite often. To do so, however, we also need to determine what we're trying to achieve. For example, do we want the subject to be far away? Or do we want it to be only a few feet or meters from the camera? I would assume that since this is an antique hall, the tiles are quite large. The doors of such buildings are usually very tall as well. I think the woman should be much smaller. So I'm gonna go ahead and shrink down the woman while keeping the horizon lines aligned. To do this, I use the reference point of the transform tool to make sure that the horizon lines stay on each other. This is a very useful tool in photo manipulation, and if you don't know how to use it, I suggest you look at some transform tool tutorials on YouTube. Whenever you're not sure how big or small something is, just Google some reference images. Since I like to be as accurate as possible, I do that all the time. I think you agree that the artwork is still missing something. So I'll be adding these 3 Siberian tigers to the composite. I think that they will elevate the artwork and make it more interesting. But more importantly, they will serve as good practice in finding and matching horizon lines of different objects. Let's start with the first tiger. I will be placing this one in front of the woman. But before placing the image, we need to find the horizon line. This image has already been clipped, so it has no background. This is what I was referring to when I mentioned isolated images at the beginning of this section. Since we don't have a background to work with, it makes it a bit harder to find the position of a horizon line. But that's okay, we now have a few new tricks up our sleeves which we can use. The image has no lines that can help us find the horizon line, and although the tiger has some depth, it's still pretty impossible to draw a receding line since it's an organic object with a complex shape. So we'll use the camera angle method and the above or below horizon principle to find the horizon line. And although we cannot find the tiger's vanishing point, we'll still have to do our best and visually match it with the background's vanishing point. We can check that once we place the tiger in the artwork. Okay, let's find the horizon line. We can tell that the camera is pointing down, as we can see most of the top part of the tiger's legs and body. As we learned in lesson 1, we know that when the camera is pointing down, the horizon line is in the top part of the photo. Because I've been doing photo manipulation for a while, and I've had a fair bit of practice doing this, I can deduce that the horizon line is sitting here, almost at the very edge of the image. Each photo is different, and the more you practice, the quicker and better you will become at this. Be patient and practice. Just make sure that you follow the steps mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, and you will get there in no time. I strongly suggest that you find and mark the horizon line for each object you'll be using, as it will help you be more accurate and make your artwork more realistic. Once you've determined the horizon line position of an object, place it and try it out in your artwork right away. Because the above or below horizon principle is an approximation, sometimes you'll find that you need to tweak it and fine-tune it visually, so that it fits more accurately in the perspective of your composite. So let's go ahead and place the tiger in our composite. Okay, that is massive, so we'll need to fix the proportions. But first, let's match the horizon lines. The horizon line is now matched with the one of the artwork. Next, we need to scale the tiger to the correct size in proportion to the woman. To do this, we need to know what the size of a tiger is in real life. Since I don't come across too many tigers in my everyday life, I had to do some research to find the size of a Siberian tiger compared to that of a human. I found Dimensions.com very useful for such comparisons. You can also use Google Images for reference. Just keep in mind that not every person is the same size, neither are animals, so you don't need to be 100%, but we want to be as realistic as possible. Looking at this diagram, the height of a standing tiger is roughly at the height of the elbows of an average standing human. However, our woman is sitting down, so that is not of much help to us. So instead, I'm going to use the size of the heads as a comparison. The size of the tiger's head in the diagram is almost 1 3/4 of that of the human. So I'll be using that scale to set my proportion. We also need to keep in mind the diminishing scale. In this case, the tiger and the woman won't be placed side by side. The tiger is in front of the woman, which means it's closer to the camera, so it needs to be a bit larger. And, voila! I think that the proportion is good, and everything seems to be in perspective, so our calculation about the tiger's horizon line was correct. Because of the way it was shot, the vanishing point of the tiger seems to be central, which is perfect, as it matches nicely with the background's vanishing point. Of course, if we want to make any changes later on, we can always go back and adjust. That's why digital art is awesome. Okay, let's move on to the next tiger. I will be placing this one to the left. Again, using the same method, the camera angle seems to be pointing slightly down. We can see the top of the tiger's paws quite a bit, which puts the horizon line far above. However, we cannot see the uppermost part of the head, which puts the horizon line further down. With that in mind, my best guess is that the horizon line is somewhere here, on the mouth. Since the photo doesn't have much visible depth, and the base of the tiger will be hidden behind the woman's dress, we don't need to worry about the vanishing point. So that's all. We'll check if that works once we place the tiger in our artwork. Okay, let's do this. So first thing, we need to match the horizon lines. Now we can scale down the tiger to the correct proportion. Just to remind you that this point I'm moving when using the transform tool is called the reference point location. I will be once more using the tiger's head for reference. That's looking good. As I mentioned before, since the depth of the tiger is hidden, we can ignore the vanishing point. Okay, one final photo. This is the tiger we'll be placing on the right. The tiger doesn't have much visible depth, so all we need to do is find the horizon line as we've learned earlier. This time we do have a background, but it's still not telling us much. So I will use the same method as the others. The camera angle looks straight, and we can see the top of the paws. We can even see just a bit under the chin, which means the horizon line is further up, but very close. We cannot see the uppermost part of the head, so the horizon line is further down. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that the horizon line area is somewhere between the eyes and the chin. In fact, I will place the horizon line almost on the mouth and check how it looks on the artwork. You might have noticed that the front legs are slightly higher than the hind ones, as they are resting on a rock. So you might ask, how are we going to place it on a flat floor? Don't worry, we can cheat a bit and hide the front legs behind the woman's dress. It should look fine. Let's see. Again, let's start by matching the horizon line first. Okay, now we can match the proportion, and once more I'm positioning my reference point location on the horizon line while using the transform tool to scale the tiger down to the size I want. I'm still using the head as a reference point for accuracy. And that's it. The only extra thing I'll be doing is flipping it horizontally so that everything is coming out from the center, as it should work better in terms of artwork composition. Yes, that's much better. And as I mentioned earlier, the tiger's front legs are hidden, so no one will know that the paws are not flat on the floor. We were also correct with the position of the horizon line as it looks in perspective with the rest of the artwork. Now with all objects in the proper perspective, we can see that it already looks realistic. Of course, this is not complete yet, as some work is still to be done in terms of light and color correction. But we will cover those in the following sections of this course. Before we conclude, I would like to share a quick tip with you. Whenever you want to create an artwork that has unrealistic proportions, for example including a subject that looks gigantic, you need to choose photos that have a different perspective from each other. What do I mean by this? So for our Tryout composite, because we wanted a realistic composition, almost all images have the horizon line in the middle of the photo. The one exception is the laying tiger, and that's because we want to show it from a high angle since it's flat on the floor. But if we wanted to make a subject look gigantic, we'd need to break this rule. Let's use a reference so that I can explain better. We'll use these two photos, and I will show you what I mean by having different perspectives. In the photo of this guy, we have a sky meeting with land, so we know that the horizon line position is here. And with the photo of the building, finding the horizon line is also easy, as we can draw receding lines that point to the vanishing point. The vanishing point is always sitting on the horizon line. And this, of course, is a one-point perspective photo. Now let's try to match the man with the background to create one composite. The first thing that we need to do is match the horizon lines. The next step is to try and get the proportions right. As you can see, although I'm resizing the guy, he still remains gigantic compared to the background. This is happening because the two photos have a different perspective. The photo of the guy has a low camera angle, with the camera pointing up, while the camera in the background image is pointing straight. So should you want to create this effect, you need to look for photos with different camera angles. However, if you're after real-life proportions, you need to choose pictures with almost the same camera angle. Otherwise, no matter how hard you try, you won't be able to make them look realistic.